Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Experts, which is a series sponsored by the Fractional XO. Our intention with these episodes is to be transparent, to show you that we know a lot about a lot of things. And if we don't know it, we know people that know it. And our whole approach with Fractional XO to bring in an XO into your organization is like what the military does is that the person that is the XO, one of their main jobs is to go get resources to execute that when things need to be done. Well, when you think about that, one of the most common resource areas is people. And it's a fascinating thing to me that we have more MBAs and cultural books, and we got all of these all this information out there about how to develop your culture, yet we still have the same problems. And so the person that I know that in the world that I know that understands workplace dynamics and people issues, the best person for that is our guest today, Mr. Juan Kingsbury. Hello, Juan.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So just for context, everyone, Juan, you've been self-employed, or you have your own business for about 12 years, is that correct?
I think going on 14, yeah.
14 years, yeah, okay. And all around workplace dynamics, but I've often said about you that you're the best disc debriefer that I've met. And I have coached a lot of coaches that are disc people, and you have this like almost alchemic way of reading disc. But you say something sometimes that I find very interesting is most people are using disc the wrong way. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm a snob, that's why. But the main thing is I'd even maybe change it to our it's incomplete. It's not it's like most people maybe don't use the gym the wrong way, is more so they're not fully leveraging it. Or like our
Okay.
phones, we have these powerful computers that we text and play games on. But I think, and even hearing that, my humble hubris side of like, am I really the best? Yeah, I am the best. But it's what makes me the best, not I have it all memorized. It's what do people get out of it? And do they really see themselves? And it's one thing to get an aha and insights. And I think that's why so many people train and study. It feels good, but it's like not just that moment or even that week. Like I want to know 3 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. I tell college students when I help them um casually is, hey, if I see you on Jeopardy and you ace the disc questions, but I find out you hate your job, I failed you. Like to me, that's
Right.
more important thing that you now have
Right.
this self-awareness tool. So I wouldn't say maybe most are wrong, but I think there's so much left on the table. Yeah, I did disc 2 years ago, 10 years ago. Okay, are you hiring great? Do you love what you do? Like it's like there's so much more to glean from it. And I think that's part of the original debrief.
Yeah.
They're not planting those seeds.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also see it where, assessments are, they used to be kind of just for maybe for like senior executives, and now there are
Hmm.
companies that do assessments for everybody, but they do it at the hiring phase and then they don't do it again.
Yes.
Um, and assuming again, this goes back to something that uh, my partner Virginia talks a lot about is that business leaders keep treating organizations as machines when they're actually complex adaptive systems. And
Yeah.
the other theory that I have behind this too is that I think most leaders are sort of production oriented, like productivity oriented. Of course,
Hmm.
you gotta get shit done and move the needle and sell stuff and all of that. However, I think they sometimes look at things like disc as a way to just sort of what I refer to as be nicer to the cows. So like dairy, like have you ever been to a
Yeah.
modern dairy? Modern dairies
Yeah.
like they're like cow spas. I mean, they
Yeah.
get foot washers and music's piped in, and they have the like customized feed, and it's not
Yeah.
because the farmers love their cows. It's because the dairy farmers want to maximize milk productivity.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think
Well,
it's
it,
something you said to me the other day, though, too, as you said, and I was asking you, we were having one of our conversations about this, kind of prepping for the show, and you said that in order to really use disc, you actually have to give a shit about your employees. It can't just be,
Yeah.
I'm using it as a recruiting checkbox. So I gave them a disc and they're a DI, whatever, you know. Tell me
Yeah.
more about what that is, like caring about how is using disc or any assessment, but disc in particular, a reflection of actually caring about your employees.
Yeah, and I actually want to go back to your question. I'll bring up that as well. Is when you said most people, like I default to trainers, facilitators, but it's like most organizations, yes, the hiring, the development, it's still the same answer of they're not fully leveraging it. But yeah, I realize I'm biased by thinking the people who deliver it, but definitely organizations, leaders. In terms of your question, that I just spaced on already because I wanted to go back to that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's okay. It's
clarify that
like, what
again.
do you, yeah, what do you mean by that disc, when disc is used properly, you have to, in order for disc to be
Oh,
used
if you
properly,
actually
you have to
care
give a
about
shit
people,
about, yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I think, let's take something like retention. I think that's a good
Mhm.
idea in theory, but won't name any names and throw anyone under the bus. But there's tons of organizations I meet where it's like, why is that person still here doing that job below
Right.
standard? Not saying you got to get rid of them, but if you really care about people, I've heard this quite a bit where people say, hey, maybe not directly for the assessment, but very often some assessment was involved where they let go of someone and then a year later that person actually thanks them. So yeah, I hated that job, I was bad at it or I was good at it,
Right.
whatever. And so I think to truly care about people isn't to make excuses for them and cover, but it's also to be like, hey, where are they going to thrive? And if you don't care about that, you can still do it, but you're not going to, you're now you as the leader, hiring manager, whatever it is, are going to put all this effort into someone that you're like, oh, they're failing, they're failing, they're failing, versus you actually care about this
Hmm.
person. It can help you decide where are they going to thrive in the organization. And going back to the comment you said about Virginia, or what Virginia shares about the not machines but complex systems, I think because of things like, well, technology and now AI, it is a lot of both because people do
Yeah.
want to automate. I mean, I'm looking out my window and I'll see Waymo driverless cars all the time.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it is this dance of these two things, and it's scary, but it's also exciting. But I do think if you are someone not just using assessments, but you're hiring people, like not it's not a moral judgment, but it's like, hey, I mean, I guess it could be, if you don't actually care about this person, you're kind of wasting your time, not just theirs. So
Right. Right.
I think that's and I also get why people don't do it, but I do think with these assessments, it highlights, wow, this is this person's superpower. Well, no, I'm going to put them in this place where they don't need that at
Right.
all.
Right.
You can, but don't.
But why?
So
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Well, that kind of leads us then into the topic for this particular episode is around how to scale your culture. So let me give it some context here. So Fractional XO and you, we both have a
Mm-hmm.
similar audience. Like one of our audience archetypes is
Mm-hmm.
we call it an acceleration moment. And this is the point where maybe the founder or CEO is no longer directly involved in hiring. That's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
threshold moment, or they maybe even get to the point where they see somebody that's working in the office or on a Zoom call and they don't know who it is,
Yeah.
let alone that they were not involved in their hiring. And usually, most CEOs and founders that do give some level of care on a spectrum to culture. They sort of get now that you can't just ignore culture. I think that's
Yes.
changed. It's like you can't ignore brand anymore either. You can't just ignore it and hope that it
Mm-hmm.
figures itself out. So, but there's this point of that I'm going to get to. This is sort of a long context setting, but I think it's important. Is we used to say scale the business. We weren't really talking about people.
Mm-mm.
We were talking about sales and we we're talking about systems. Well, now because of automation and because of the cloud, most companies are in, if they got, like, for example, HubSpot as their CRM and marketing platform, they can use
Yeah.
that for a long time.
Yes.
Um, Even MailChimp as a CRM is fine for until you get to like big lists and you need some sort
Yeah.
of like sophisticated, email plumbing. Or even QuickBooks, if you're moving from QuickBooks to say SAP, or you're moving from a small company that does IT management to working with BMC or somebody like that,
Hmm.
there's scale there. But generally speaking, when we're talking about scale now, we're talking about scaling the culture. And so one of my questions for you is my first questions with related to this is when do you start to see in these companies that are in like, let's call it like, let's just say for now, employee 101. So I'm not saying that's the threshold, but that's what we're going to call
Sure.
it for now. But at what point do you start to see what we call cultural entropy kick in, where there's sort of like the culture stops taking care of itself because the downside to being a complexive adaptive system is it creates stagnation or it starts to erode or there's sacrificing of principles or like when do you see that happening at what employee number or point in a business that's trying to scale?
I think there's probably multiple times for different businesses, but especially I actually work out of a co-working space for a lot of startups and a lot of hungry, ambitious people. One to three, sometimes a little bit more, but that's usually it. But vastly different when they have their fifth person, 10 person, the dynamic, the responsibility, the what is it called, the points or the shareholding,
Yeah, right.
and who's worried about payroll versus who's worried about getting folded under but I do think I wouldn't maybe say the time, but when I see it, if I'm walking in and I'm working in whether it's a workshop or coaching, I'll use this term, people going tribal or start making up their own rules and they're able to
Mm-hmm.
enforce them. And it's like, why is that allowed? Well, so and so just decided. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, but why? Like, it, but
Yeah,
why? And so when I
yeah,
start to see a lot of if all 50 states started having their own currency, we
right.
that
Mm-hmm.
and so when new rules that aren't being top down from or at least not communicated, it's just kind of like it's the way it is. That's usually a good sign of the word you use, entropy, of like, hey,
Yeah,
this
huh.
what it originally was, and I wouldn't even say it's necessarily bad, but it's fractured, and that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
problem.
yeah. That's interesting. What are some other ones that come to mind? Other
Um,
threshold moments where you see that start to happen?
I mean, this is broad, but it's true. Is like when strategically from the top, hey, we're going to go this direction, and then you have the rest of the executive team lay that out, and then all of a sudden they have to take it back, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
you're having to be the messenger, and so people start to like, okay, you don't trust it. It's kind of like the company that cried wolf, and
Mm-hmm.
so depending, I would probably say at least uh, a handful of executives, whether it be 5 to 10 with the company size, that are now having to relay the information. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it comes down to, I think, that even with my first example, it's the communication and trust. When what you're saying isn't what you're doing, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the cultural
Yeah,
shift. Maybe not even necessarily bad, but chances are the rest of your employees know. They know that, hey,
yeah,
we said we were going to go remote and now we're not. Or hey, we said we're going
yeah,
to not increase
yeah.
prices and now we have. When
Right.
the message doesn't match the actions.
Yeah, yeah. That's an excellent point. Yeah, I would add too is we see this with at FXO is especially when they're ready for an XO is when they've sort of outgrown their buddies. The founder
Yeah.
did like
Yeah.
he or she hired their like college roommate that knows how to do sales or
Yes.
like it's I'm being a bit using a bit of hubris here, but that
Sure.
there's a sense of like the buddy system is starting to fall apart. But I think this is a key thing that's interesting is that you talk about like four things that leaders want. And I'll see if I can remember them. Is they want problem solve faster, better decision making. What
Hmm.
are the other two?
Less drama, more
Less
creativity.
drama, more creativity. What's interesting is if when you're in a self-contained unit, that it's probably around when you look at anthropology, probably around 20 people, and you've got smart people committed to the vision, that happens naturally.
Hmm.
And then it's around this time you're like, I got hiring practices, there's compliance now, like, and you start to think about maybe you outsource to like a fractional chief people officer, or maybe you hire an HR person or whatever. There's this
Yeah.
moment where you that what was natural and happened every day stops being effective when you try to
Hmm.
scale. That's what you mean about scaling the culture. And so when you get to like employee 20, what I think the impulse is like, oh, we got to write this down. We need SOPs.
Yeah.
Um, well, no, I don't think. I mean, yes, probably to some extent, but really is it's not best practices, it's best principles.
Yes.
And being able to say this is the what we believe in. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
work that I do with branding is that you organize it around kind of your core values,
Hmm.
and that's how people operate both, in with each other and then with out in branding and marketing and sales and everything else.
Yes.
So in this case, with those four things that you said, it would require not putting it in a manual. It would require, to Virginia's point, thinking more systemically, like a garden and not a machine, a level of autonomy. Like
Yes.
you have to be able to like hire the right people and let them do their thing.
Hmm.
So in your world of what you're doing with workplace dynamics and the workshops you take leaders through and disc and all that other stuff, what are some insights that you have about what you need to know about the culture at that moment where it's no longer natural to do those four things that you said?
I'll go back to the SOP because and one of my favorite quotes I learned in the last couple of years is don't mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself.
Oh yeah,
Like I think
yeah,
documenting stuff, especially with AI now, like it's really great. Like
hmm,
it's gonna save you time,
yeah,
but that's not the main thing. And I even think of like indigenous cultures of passing on stories, and that's how
yeah, yeah. It's
it's
an
like
oral
write every
history, right? Yeah,
yeah.
uh-huh,
And I mean, imagine, when you hear a story from a relative or a loved one, like that hits you differently than, hey, read this book about history, most of
yeah,
us, whether you're a kid or not. But the, I think it's not just hire people for them to do their thing. It's also, you got to know what you want. Cause I think that's where a lot of the
yeah,
mistake is like, hey, my buddy, or hey, this, like, I get it. And to the point, it works for a while, but as you're scaling, things are changing and there's different pressure, different variables. It just for the benefit of
right.
your audience, two books that come to mind that very different, but very much on that scaling. Lost and Founder. It's more of a tech that this guy loved. It was actually marketing
Hmm.
based. Forget his name, but um, and then Hard Things About Hard Things, the Angel Investors original,
Hmm.
where he has to fire a bunch of his friends because I think of it as like playing basketball at the park versus now having a whole citywide tournament.
Yeah,
The rules and
yeah, right.
referees. You maybe have to pay for parking. The bigger you get, the more structure. But I think when you just focus on the structure and the rules, you lose sight of why we did this in the first place. And
That's right.
for the benefit
Yes.
of your clients who are or even just fans who are smart enough to listen to me, like it starts with you. And I don't want to borrow from Simon Sinek. I don't think it's wrong, but the like, why am I doing this? But I'll actually change
Hmm.
that of your standards. That's the problem. Is
Hmm.
like what I notice most of the time is people start to lose, like whether it's coffee or software, like you want to
Hmm.
make a good burger or a good
Right.
whatever it is. And as it gets passed and as you get removed from that hiring, and hell, even when you are, yes, you want good people and you want people to have good attitudes, but like you want people to meet your standards so you can continue doing whatever it is that you want to do more of. But if
Hmm.
you're not honest with that or vague, I think that's even worse. Um, that's when so many problems arise is the original person is not clear on their standards. And here's kind of a left field, but I'm using ChatGPT more and more. I don't ask good questions when I'm working with myself and working with
Yeah.
him. Like, oh, I have to really like it's not giving me what I want. Well, there's only one person to blame here. And so using it has actually
Hmm.
made me better at expressing what I want, interested, etc. But I think that the one of the impediments is when you are that smaller, kind of tighter group,
Hmm.
you express it. And I don't think it has to be in person, but usually that helps. But even if you're remote
Yeah.
all over the world, when it's tighter, you can be more clear, which isn't just, hey, let's go save the world. It's like, insert expletive, this isn't good. You're at least
Yeah.
expressing yourself. But then as you get further away, that standard, it's the game telephone that we all played as
Yeah.
kids. And you have to find a way to maintain that standard. SOPs are a good way, but not a guarantee, and then usually can be a
Right.
distraction.
Well, and I think there's this illusion too, is that the same cultural dynamics that were in play for the first 20 employees are going to be there in
Oh
play, and there's just
yeah.
going to be it. And it's no, it doesn't work that
Yeah.
way. And it also goes back to, you can't really write down culture. You have to write down
Yeah.
standards, like you said, like best principles. This is
Yeah.
the way we do things and why we do it, and this is why we, I root brands and like your mission and your purpose and all that stuff, because
Mhm.
that's what lasts. The
Yeah.
market is a fickle mistress. It's going to change.
Yeah.
You have generational changes, and you've got, if you start to globalize, you've got, cultural differences and all of that. And I think that it makes it even more important to be aware of workplace dynamics at around that point, because it's not so much about the people you hire, it's about the people you hire that will hire the people.
Hmm.
And that so here's an example. If you got 20 people, you can have a company party, and you can have like a happy
Yeah.
hour, and you can really get to know people and hang out, maybe drink a little too much and be a little
Yeah.
inappropriate or something like that. You get above 20, you
Yeah.
really can't do that anymore unless you're just in a lifestyle business. and
Yeah.
and so what you have to do is you have to get to know people in a different way. Well, workplace dynamics approach, as I understand it with your way in particular, is part of using something like DISC is to get to know that person that you're hiring or leading,
Hmm.
because that helps accelerate trust. Like if someone is I'll use me as an example, a 100D, 100I essentially, it's not just about role. Like don't put Justin, looking at spreadsheets, or he's going to like put a fork in his eye.
Hmm.
The spreadsheets will suck.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, also like, what motivates Justin? What do I need to get out of Justin to get what I want as a leader? All of
Yeah.
these things, like you're not going to learn that like you did for the first 20. You have to accelerate that process, which is why, in every sports league, but I think of the NFL in particular, the amount of assessments that they do,
Yeah.
mental health assessments, physical assessments, all of that, underwear tests, and all of that,
Yeah.
especially with first round draft picks and quarterbacks, is
Yeah.
that will kill your culture if you hire an asshole at that level.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's not even really about performance; it's about the culture, and you get
Yeah.
that like toxic employee because his resume looked good.
Yeah.
So anyway, any comment on that before I ask you the last
Yeah. Yeah.
question?
No, actually, I'll go because I think you said this a while back, but I think it's I assume, and I'm wrong, that everyone's heard of DISC or it seems some assessments, and I'm always pleasantly
Mm-hmm.
surprised that people haven't. But even when people have, it's not like, oh, that's great. Like to me, if you know DISC, then you are hiring people well. You're actually the number one sign that I really just give a damn about is, are you loving what you do? Not is it easy and
Right.
it's Coronas on a beach, but like, are you in the right spot? And most of the time, not always, I think there are people, yeah, and it's a bell curve or a sweet spot is like, no, I got this people problem and I got this people problem. And even in this
Mm-hmm.
conversation, for the audience, Justin and I are friends, so we talk quite a bit. Like I can hear you focus on the people, which yes, I care about that, but also it's a job. There's a role like that. If we didn't have this role, we wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have this people problem. But this person is coming in with their bias. And so going back to what I had said earlier, where I think so many people miss, it's almost a spiritual thing that I think I'm saying, similar to cynics start with why, but it's like you built this company. These are things that are important to you, or more likely piss you off, and you're doing something about it. And you've built a squad of
Right.
people, for better or for worse, that work well. But the further you get from the people that they hire, um, that vibe, that frequency or whatever it is going to lessen, which is okay because you got to go do what you got to do. But these other people, it's not their baby. They're not even babysitting their baby, and but you want
Right.
them to care. And because of their own unique biases, be it DISC or emotional intelligence, education, background, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I'll sum it up this way. You have your story of why this company is important, why you want to scale. They don't. They're there for a
Mm-hmm.
paycheck. And you have the, I would say, opportunity to give them a story by investing in the very simple, like, hey, here's your style. Like that is a great place to
Yeah.
start, but a very weak finish, because now if they can weave this style that existed even before you assess them or they were assessed, it's how can I let this bear fruit in this role with this team? Or, hey, you know what? This role is not great for me anymore. I want to jump ship. But the
Hmm.
way they do that, like you had said, like companies are going to scale, like good and bad times. People are going to leave, for good and bad reasons. But most of the time, especially if
Hmm.
you don't get ahead of it, it's for bad reasons and it could have been better. But to me, is you have your story as the leader. The rest of your company doesn't. Everyone's going to be happy the first week, maybe month. When they get
Hmm.
the role, it's later on in hindsight that they're like, I don't like this, I don't like that. And it's like finger
Yeah.
pointing versus they didn't even know what they wanted. They applied for the software job because that was their major. But if they really sat down and thought about it, this was never a good match to begin with, which is
Yes.
not bad, but an opportunity to learn and get ahead. So yeah, I think
Yeah. And that happens like in college sports too, is the coaches invest, the head coaches in particular, they invest a lot now in like getting to know what the player and his or her parents want for their future. And so we use football again. It's like if you want to make it to the NFL, that's the path we're going to nurture. If you want
Mhm.
to end up getting into coaching, then we'll set you up to get a GA role, once you graduate. Or maybe you want to play, have a good time, get your degree, and go sell insurance. Whatever. The person that you're hiring is entitled to you giving a shit about their future. They're entitled to that because you are also entitled to hear from them that you get their best effort.
Mhm.
So so this is a good segue to the last question, and then we're going to go to the green room, and for all those that tuned in to be able to listen to ask you questions that I didn't ask you, and that's part of the
Sounds
green
good.
room fun. Um, is so everybody's in the people business, but not very many people are good at it.
Mhm.
And we got the same people problems we've had for years with some additional ones. Um, if you were the CEO and you were going to you're hiring your next level of leadership, maybe not your C-suite, but your
Mhm.
next level of leadership, and you want to scale your culture, you want decisions made better, problem solved faster, higher creativity, less drama. What would be two or three must have non-negotiable traits of that next gen of leaders that you're hiring?
Oh, that is a very good question. So you're saying not C-suite, the last one?
Yeah, so assume that the C-suite, through one way or the other, is going to,
Mm-hmm.
because think about this, in companies, it's what David Armano calls the frozen middle. Most companies don't have a C-suite problem.
Yeah.
They get all the training and the books and the conferences and everything. And actually, the front line isn't. They have all kinds of. It's the middle, the frozen
Yeah.
middle, where that next tier of
Yeah.
leaders. They don't. There's just they're hired to be managers and not leaders.
Yeah.
And as a mentor of mine, Rose Fast says, is you manage numbers and you hire people and you lead people. Just don't. And when you get that backwards, that's when you
Yeah.
start to get drama. So anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. No,
So assuming it's that second, let's say it's let's just create a scenario. This is a commercial plumbing business, been around for
Mhm.
25 years, um, and they are no. Let's go back because this is about scaling culture. So they've been in business about 5 years, and they need to hire a director of customer service that's going to report to the COO.
Sure.
What is that next level? What are three non-negotiables that you would have if you're the CEO?
Yeah, I feel like two of these are cop outs, but they're what I believe, and the third is more maybe controversial. But the first is they need to know how to hire. They got the job because they're probably
Hmm.
good at the role or have done it, but how do I actually build the team? The difference
Yeah,
between, Michael Jordan, one of the greatest of all time, not so great at GM, or the athlete doesn't always transfer to the
yeah,
coach. So
yeah,
knowing how to hire
mhm.
for your team is a separate skill from doing the job that you're hiring for.
Yeah. Well said.
Second,
Hmm.
yeah. Then second is developing or coaching to it. It's the difference of recruiting players versus actually getting them ready to level up in the league. Um, which again is one thing. I can do this, but can I teach you how to do it? That's the difference between great sales managers and just a sales performer. And then the last one, more controversial, is um, I'm going to call it offboarding. Like, hey, someone, I got an A player and they're leaving, or I got
Hmm.
someone who I got to cut loose because we've done everything. It's just not working out. But not just from a legal standpoint, but from uh, uh, a cultural standpoint of, hey, if we can part ways for better or for worse, maybe this A player comes back as an A plus player, or maybe this C player is grateful and senses someone who is a better fit. So I think those
Hmm.
three things, mainly the first two, but the third,
Hmm.
to me, the if you do the first two well, the third is naturally going to happen because you're not going to waste your
Hmm.
time with someone who can't meet you at the level. But yeah, those are also skills that I see most people don't get because
Yeah.
they were so busy doing the role, and now we just need to put them into a management or a team lead position.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think those are great. And I don't think that they're I think they're so true and rarely done, which is
Yeah,
no one really trains people how to hire.
yeah,
Um, and they teach people management skills, air quotes,
yeah,
but they don't teach them, like, leadership is coaching
hmm,
ultimately. It's helping people get to where they wouldn't go on their own.
yeah,
So I would add, my three would be: first is, I would want to know, if I'm going to hire that second tier of leaders, I got to figure out how to ask this in a way that would be, you know, in compliance, but I want to know what their mental health is, because I've seen it so many times, is people seek out leadership positions often because they have unresolved trauma and it gives them a sense of control. And then when under stress, which is all about, growth is stress,
hmm,
they crack. You see them like break down because they don't have their mental health in order. So I would want to find out their relationship with mental health without asking, do you go to therapy?
yeah,
There's ways to
yeah,
ask that. Um, Number two is, they have to have actual, not they're not a hologram. They don't
hmm,
see being a leader as um, a part to play. They're not cosplaying leadership.
yeah,
They have natural leadership skills. Like, that's huge to me. I don't care what your resume says. You have to have natural leadership skills, and a lot of that comes from knowing who you are and what kind of person you are, so you can lead others.
yeah,
That would be the second one. And the third one is essentially um, how to be a shepherd and not a cattle driver.
hmm,
So cattle, grow up on a ranch, you drive cattle, you push them, from behind, you move
yeah,
them. And a lot of people see business that way, but it's not. It's the shepherd walks out in front and the sheep follow him.
hmm,
If those of you, any of you have been around agriculture, you try to drive sheep, it's pretty hilarious.
yeah,
They call it like herding cats. It should be called herding sheep, because
yeah,
they won't do anything they're told to do.
yeah,
So a shepherd is that they're willing to get out in front and model the behavior that they expect from other people.
yeah.
That
But
is a
I
huge
also,
thing. And I think they loops back around. Somebody that hasn't done the inner work and hasn't dealt with their trauma, or they don't have good mental health, they see at a subconscious level their people as someone to control,
mhm,
not inspire.
yeah, I agree, and I would. I think the whole pushing and the management as opposed to leader is what you have to do when someone doesn't know how to hire and develop the right people.
That's right.
You're putting square pegs in round holes, and that to me isn't bad. It's just not what we could be doing, and so I think
Yes,
that's,
right.
but if you have to earn it, we were going to talk about trust, but that's how you do it. And I think, kind of to your mental health point, I think if they tell me, hey, this is how I got rid of a person, or maybe not this is how I offloaded a person, or this is how I try to keep an A player, I would pick up pretty healthy that by someone being open and constructive in those uh, sensitive situations, I'd pick up if someone's a gaslighter or a manipulator real
Hmm.
fast, because it's the whole letting people go and wanting the
Yes.
best for them and just saying, hey man, it's not here, but we'll keep you. As long as you want this,
Yes.
we're happy to give it to you. But if you're going to go and be an astronaut, we love it. Hope you come back and give
Yeah.
us a shout out or whatever. But I think that, to me, how people relate to their job, I think says a lot about our mental health. And to your point, we kind of, myself included, in the past, it becomes our whole life. And that's not necessarily the healthiest thing.
Right.
Might be great temporarily, but not sustainable.
Yeah. Not sustainable. Good stopping point. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next episode of Meet the Experts. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. If you have an expert you'd like us to interview or have on, please just reach out to us at thefractionalxo.com. I'll put all of Juan's contact info in the show notes. And if you are hiring and you are trying to scale your culture, Juan is your man. So, all
Thanks for
right,
having me.
we'll see you in the green room.